So incentives 3.0, what is that? I guess also like, why is it even called incentives 3.0? We've gone through a few iterations of how to incentivize people and find valuable people and reward them. And this is the third scheme. So that's what we're calling it, incentives 3.0. I'm going to try to explain a little bit more about how that works. And this is really the best time for people to ask for clarifications because there are a lot of details there and nuances. So if you want that to be clarified and you suspect other people may be not sure about how things work, please ask at this time. All right. And I think we need to make this into some content also that people can look at later. Cool. Okay. So why don't we start with sort of what is the flow that a person has to go through in the new scheme? How does that work? Well, first, you will be earning joy directly. So before, you were earning founding member points, and these points had a sort of tenuous relationship to actual joy. Right now, you complete a bounty, or you do work, or you're a lead or a validator, or you refer someone, that constitutes a certain amount of actual joy tokens. And that's the first step. And the onboarding experience that I described prior, the goal of that is going to be to help people really very early and very quickly be able to earn their first joy allocation. That's the goal there. But you will also earn tJOY. So tJOY is basically the testnet token for the testnet. It's equivalent to cash because you can still cash it out into, I believe it's Bitcoin Cash that we still use. So some people were confused thinking maybe tJOY is no longer a thing or it doesn't have any value. It does. It is still useful for being able to do a lot of the different things that like staking and paying for things on the testnet. So tJOY is still a thing. So you earn joy and cash in parallel. That's sort of how it works. And there are really three kinds of things you can do. You can do bounties, which is not going to be orchestrated by the bounty module. You can be a council member, a worker in a working group, a lead in a working group, or a validator. So validators still exist. Or you can refer a friend. There's we always had a way to earn founding member points that was based on referring people, but that scheme didn't work that well. So we've sort of changed the rules for how that works. We may still tweak that a little bit before launch, but basically there is a way to also earn joy tokens for referring friends. All right. So you get to earning. Then the next milestone is that once you earn a certain number of joy tokens, the number isn't so important for like my explanation, but X number of joy tokens, you will need to be verified basically, which means that we check basically who you are, that you're not a US person, that you're not already someone who's in the founding member program. So there's basically kind of like a KYC step at that point where we have to check that, you are who you say you are. And before you do that, if you keep earning joy tokens, and this is really important, you will not get credit for them. They will effectively be lost or you won't get any credit for them. So the moment you start getting close to this limit, and that's going to be a public limit. That's going to be on our community handbook and in the dashboards that Ben is preparing. You have to get verified. Once you get verified, then you could just keep on participating. The idea is that you would sort of graduate to participate in more sort of senior roles because you're going to earn more tJOY, which is going to translate to more joy. I'm going to explain that later. But basically, the more involved you are, the more joy you earned, which is going to get you closer to a founding member status. There is no sort of magic line in the sand where if you reach this point, you will be guaranteed to get founding member status. But there's going to be a closer relationship than there was before between getting that status and how much joy you have effectively, or points really, it was before, but joy in this case, you've earned. So that's sort of the flow that people will be going through. And some people on this call have already founding members and they can continue to earn more joy. You're not capped. And other people may be very early in this life cycle and they have to go through those steps. Am I going too quick, Robert, or is that kind of clear, do you think?
I think it's okay. Although I've been I've been through this before. So
yeah, of course, yes.
I guess it depends. But we'll turn it over to you guys. If it's too fast, just let us know in the chat.
All right. So that's sort of the flow you go through. Now, how does this earning happen? Well, it's all centered around a council period. Currently, we are aiming for a 7-day period. We're debating a little bit. Should it be 7 days or should it be 2 weeks? So a little bit of an open question, but that's the order of time scale that we're looking at. And at the beginning of this period, JS Genesis is going to announce basically what the rules are, how much you can earn for certain things, certain kinds of scores that I'm going to be explaining. And once that's clear, basically everyone participates and does their job or their activity, whatever they want to do. And at the end of the period, JS Genesis will basically automatically compute how much joy different people have earned. So this means you no longer need to submit your forms or do any of that. So hopefully it's going to allow us to process a lot more people. And it's going to be much less sort of opaque why you're getting X rather than Y and so on. The exception here is bounties and referrals. So bounties, because it may take longer than the 7-day period, you won't get credit for them right away. It will happen whenever you actually submit the work in the bounty, but the idea is still the same. Same with referrals. It may be that you refer someone at some point in time, but it's only when they get verified that you get credit for it. So those two are an exception, but it's still sort of the same idea. Okay, so what are these rules and variables that JS Genesis sets at the beginning of the period? So they're basically, it's kind of small. I hope people can still see it, but they're basically a few different variables. The most important one is obviously how many joy tokens that can be earned in this period. That's the joy budget. Another key variable is how much tJOY the council can spend, and that's across everything. So that's validators and bounties and working groups and everything. So there's an overall budget of effectively cash. And then there is the subsidy that comes from JS Genesis. So that's just how many dollars we add to the pool of that's backing the tJOY value, because the idea is that tJOY is not supposed to go up or down over time. It's more or less a stable coin. So if a certain amount of tJOY has to be spent for people to pay for infrastructure or developers or builders or something, then they're going to be cashing out to pay for their expenses and so on. And so that's where this subsidy comes from. There is also going to be a limit to this how much you can earn without getting verified. That's this cap limit. There's a referral limit, which tells you how many people can get referred in a given 7-day period. But these are sort of the main council parameters, council period parameters. A second thing that JS Genesis will be specifying, by the way, so these values can change from one period to the next. That's the important thing here. So maybe in one period, 1% over 1 7-day periods, 1% of the tokens will be distributed, whilst, well, that sounds like a lot, but you get the idea. But whilst the next one, it may be reduced or increased based on what we're seeing is happening in the network. Same with the subsidy and the tJOY budget and so on. Another thing that we specify is also how the performance of the network will be evaluated overall. And this is a really key part of why we think the new testnets will work much better. The idea is for the council to really have an incentive to figure out if we want the system to work well, and that's what the score tries to capture. So think of everything from having low latency distributors and having good uptime on the storage providers and having a good experience for the HR working group, which is going to be working on onboarding, all these things. It's the council's job to, first of all, allocate its budget across all those different things, to fire and hire leads based on how good they're doing, to change policies and rules, and basically run the whole system. That's the idea. And this scoring scheme is basically meant to tell the council how we will evaluate the total performance of the testnet over that 7-day period. And their compensation as council members is going to be tied to how well they do on this metric. And so this score is going to basically tell the council how they should run the system, and they're going to be giving instructions to the leads and the workers based on how they're being scored over time. So those are the two things that will be specified at the beginning of each council period, these parameters and the scoring system. Now, how does that translate into actual like joy tokens for individual people, right? So there are a few different ways. So for workers, leads, validators, and for bounties, basically the way it works is you get a share of the tJOY budget. So not tJOY, but the tJOY budget, which is equal to the share of the tJOY that you've earned. So let me give an example to make that clear. Let's say you earned 100 tJOY being a content curator, and the total tJOY budget for the whole system, so that's everything that is money that there's being spent money on for this council period, is 1,000. And let's assume that the tJOY budget, that's how much is being distributed to everyone as a group, is 0.5%. So the first one is basically specific to you. The second one is given by JS Genesis. The third one is also given by JS Genesis. Then how much tJOY you personally will earn is basically equal to the share of that tJOY budget that your salary constitutes. So that means people who earn more, like if you are an important person, let's say, if you are doing something that requires a lot of tJOY to incentivize, you will be earning more tokens. If you are doing something less important, let's say you're doing a bounty for 1 tJOY in this example, perhaps, to follow this example, you will be earning a smaller share of the overall amount of tJOY which is available for everyone to earn. So you're keeping an eye on the chat. I'm sort of focusing just on the presentation here, Robert. So just interrupt when you feel like there's something.
Yeah, there's one question, but we can take it at the end of this whole incentives.
Yeah. So that's basically the way it works for workers, right? And so who decides the salary of a worker? It's the lead in the working group. But the lead of the working group has to respect the budget of their working group, right? Because each working group has a separate budget. So let's say I'm the content working group. Maybe I have a budget of 100 tJOY, which I have to spend across everyone in the working group. Whilst in another working group, let's say the storage providers, they may have a much bigger budget or a much smaller budget, right? And who decides that? That's the council. So you can see how the council's ability to control how tJOY is allocated across the different working groups effectively allows them to redirect people and resources, because the tJOY will follow the tJOY effectively. So that's sort of the token incentive model there. The leads are compensated in a similar way. However, the leads are their salaries directly set by the council. Keep in mind that this means different workers in the same group can have different amount of tJOY, right? Maybe you're a rock star builder. Even though you're not a worker and you're not the lead, you may just be one of the workers. Or maybe you work more, or whatever the reason may be, you can be earning more tJOY than another worker, which means you'll be earning more tJOY than other workers in the same group. Okay, so that's the model for all those 4 things. Bounties is the same thing. Each bounty has a tJOY budget, and you will not at the, maybe you deliver your bounty in the same council period. Maybe that's a little bit unlikely for more complicated bounties, but for simpler bounties, maybe that's okay. But it follows the same basic model of the share of the tJOY budget that your compensation constitutes. All right. Then when it comes to referring a friend, it's basically a fixed. So there's like X number of tJOY per friend that was referred. And the person, of course, needs to be verified. So it's like people can't like invite themselves or like their 10-year-old brother or whatever it would be. They will be verified. And if you should all read the handbook rules, there's some pretty strict rules around people doing abusive things, trying to trick the system. So that's going to be pretty harshly punished. People will lose their tJOY allocations if we find people trying to sort of go against the spirit of the system. So the rules are going to be laid out pretty clearly, and it's going to be pretty strict penalties. All right, so we've covered referrals, bounties, workers, leads, validators, same with validators. Then it comes to council members. Okay, so those are the ones that are a little bit different because in a way, they're like the coordinators of the system. So every council member earns the same amount of tJOY, so cash, and JS Genesis decides how much tJOY they earn. In the future, that's just going to be a runtime parameter that can be updated using a proposal, but for now, it's going to be fixed. And their model is, in a sense, very similar to everyone else, namely the share of the total tJOY budget that they get equals the amount of tJOY that they get But that couldn't be the end of it, because then they would have no incentive to do a good job, because they're going to get the same amount no matter what. So what is additionally the case for them is that this ratio is weighted by the performance of the system squared. So there is this network performance score, which is a number between 0 and 1, 1 obviously being good, in which case, 1 squared is just 1. And so you just earn the maximum amount, which is the share of the tJOY budget which exists. And the lower you go, the more severely you're punished, because it's a square and you're going to have a lower share of what you could have earned. So that's the reason why the council is going to do a good job as we've defined it in the scores. They want to have a high score so that they get a number close to 1, so that when it's squared, it leaves more or less their compensation intact. And the smaller they go, the more severely they're going to be penalized. And the way they do that is to make sure this total score is as high as possible, which is stated in terms of performance of storage providers and all these things that I sort of alluded to before. All right. So that's the model. In this model, the council is much, much more important. They have a much more interesting and complicated job. They really need to supervise and make sure they have the right people in the right positions. They are severely penalized for leaving performance on the table, so to speak. It really hits home in terms of the joy that they earn. It's likely going to be a smaller council, as many of you have seen. That isn't inherent to the scheme, but experience has just shown that you get a free rider problem in the council if it becomes too big, at least here on testnet. So we're probably going to make it smaller, but we want it to be as big as possible. So if that works, if that sort of works out, we will try to increase it until we get feedback that things are going poorly, or we look at the scores and we see things are going poorly. All right. So there is a model which tries to tell you how much value is distributed across different activities based on some inputs that you can provide. There's a link here at the bottom. There is substantial value at stake, as you can gather from this. For this portion of the founding member program, there is 10% percentage points of value at stake. I think in this model there was something like 0.3% was distributed on a weekly basis, which is a lot of money. So you can see the dollar amounts are very, very large. The leads here are earning 40,000 per 7-day period. Again, not cash, but in JOY equivalent value. Distributors are earning quite a lot. These values will change over time, and this may not be the actual values you use for the first week, but I don't think it's that far off either. Cool. Okay. So that was a lot of information, Robert. Do I need to go back, restate anything, or?
If you can go back to, I think it was the one where you're showing how to figure out how much this one. Yeah. So the JOY budget is 0.5% of what?
Of the sort of JOY token distribution at launch. So
okay,
the whole yeah. So that's a certain, you could convert that into X number of literal tokens. The only reason not to do that is because we don't want to lock ourselves into saying that there's going to be a total number of like 1 billion tokens at launch. We want to just keep that to be a free parameter for now. Yeah. So that's why we're just stating it in terms of percentages.
Yes. Okay.
So yeah.
Cool. And there was a question from Isonar. He says, sounds like the incentives 3.0 is 100% on-chain process.
Yes. I mean, I'm not sure maybe in what way the old scheme was not. I mean, there was the whole KPI side of things. He's certainly right in that you don't need to write these big essays and send them to Ben, who has to sit and parse through them and figure out what's going on. And then you don't know why. Like in this scheme, you're going to know exactly why you earned what you earned. And you're also going to know exactly where you should be going, right? So maybe there are like 4 things you could do based on your skills. You will know, okay, I need to go to this one because there I can look back the X number of periods. This is what they earned, and it will be very clear to you. So in that sense, maybe you could say it's more on-chain also. But there's still people in the loop here. I mean, we are certainly defining here what success looks like for the council, which impacts how much they get and also how they are shifting resources. So, for example, if we made content curation extremely important for the score, maybe it ends up that the council spends all of the tJOY, that is all of the joy, on just council content curators, right? That would be kind of stupid, but you still get the idea. So I mean, I would say maybe in that sense it is more on chain, but yeah,